In this video, we will go over how to use the distance cluster tool in our spatial products. The distance cluster tool allows you to cluster points into clusters with no members greater than a given distance from each other. In this example, I have some stores plotted on a map in the Gauteng area, and I would like to cluster them so that the points in each cluster are no greater than 5 kilometers away from each other. The tool can be found in the Tools tab over here, or can be searched for in the search bar. Clicking on the tool brings up the following dialog. The first thing we will choose is the layer that we will be doing the clustering on, which in this case is my Gauteng stores layer. Then you will choose the cluster field where the cluster values will be populated once the clustering is done. You can choose an existing field in your data, or you can choose to have a new cluster field created for you that will be added to your data. I will choose to create a new cluster field and I will call this cluster. Next, you can choose a cluster category for the clustering so that all the points within a certain cluster remain within some category and don't go outside of that category. So for example, if within the Gauteng area here, I wanted to keep all my clusters within their respective suburbs and not to cross over in any cluster, then I could choose a suburb column in my data to use as the cluster category for the clustering. In this case, I won't specify any cluster category. Lastly, you'll specify the maximum distance that you want to be maintained between the points in each of your clusters. And like I said, I want this to be 5 kilometers in this case, so I will enter that in here, and this is in meters, so I will say 5,000 meters. I'm now ready to do my clustering, and I can say compute. My clustering is done. To see the results of your clustering, we will go to the layer data grid of the layer, right-clicking and going to view data. And then we can see at the end here, a new cluster field has been added for me in my data with all the cluster values populated for each point in this layer now. Now, to make sense of this clustering and visually see it, we can apply a theme. To do that, we will right-click on the layer and go to Properties, Thematics tab, and then click New Theme. I will call this new theme Cluster. We will then go to the Colors tab to apply a color theme. By color column, we will choose the column we will be theming on, which in this case is the cluster column. And then we will say Choose Unique Colors. Colors are then populated for each of the cluster values in that column. I can change these colors by clicking on them and choosing some other color, or even using colors from a color palette here. In this case, I will just take the default colors that is chosen, and then I will say OK. And there we go. We can now visually see the clustering that was done, and there is a theme legend now that I can use to tick clusters on and off and analyze clusters. If I want to isolate a specific cluster, I can right click on it and say isolate. And I can even then zoom to it by saying zoom fit. To put all clusters back on, I can right click and say all on, and then zoom back to the extent of my data. Now, before doing your clustering, you could specify to only cluster on selected elements. You would first select those elements using one of the selection tools, select them in your scene, and then before running the clustering, you would just tick on selected only, so that only selected elements are clustered for you. Similarly, you can choose to only cluster visible points and not hidden ones in your data, and you would tick this on before doing the clustering. Lastly, what you can do is after you've done your clustering and your cluster values have been created, if you wanted to clear them, you could come here and click Clear Cluster Values, and this will clear the cluster values that were populated in the cluster field in your data, leaving that column blank now, and then you could redo your clustering after that. And that's all for this demonstration. Thank you very much.